On today's episode, we are going to be talking about the redundancy principle from the book E-Learning and Science of Instruction by Clark and Meyer. Some e-learning describes graphics using words in both on-screen text and audio narration in which the audio repeats the text is called the redundancy principle. The psychological advantage of presenting words in audio alone is that you avoid overloading the visual channel of working memory that occurs when the eyes focus both on the graphics and the printed words. However, there are some circumstances in which the use of redundant on-screen text can be beneficial. These are what we call boundary conditions. There are 4 exceptions that I'm going to tell you about now, and then I will explain later on in the episode. The first is when there are no graphics. The second is the presentation rate is slow-paced or learner-paced. The third is when narration includes technical or unfamiliar words, and the last is when the added text is shorter than the narration itself. However, we're going to talk about those few examples in a little bit. Principle 1 states that you should not add on-screen text to narrated graphics. Clark and Meyer's reason for this principle is that learners might pay too much attention to the printed words that they pay less attention to the accompanying graphics. When their eyes are on the printed words, learners cannot look at the on-screen graphics and at the words at the same time, taking away from what they should be looking at in terms of content. In addition, learners may try to compare and reconcile on-screen text and the narration, which requires extraneous cognitive processing to learning the actual content itself. Clark and Meyer also talk about the psychological reasons for the redundancy principle. The learning style hypothesis is based on the information acquisition theory of multimedia learning, which holds that learning consists of receiving information. According to the information acquisition theory, 3 ways of delivering the same information is better than 2, especially if 1 or 2 of the routes do not work well for some learners. Therefore, the information acquisition theory predicts that students will learn more deeply from multimedia presentations when redundant on-screen text is included rather than excluded. Unfortunately, there is no available research evidence to back up the learning style views. In contrast to the information acquisition view, the cognitive theory of multimedia learning is based on the assumptions that 1. All people have separate channels for processing verbal and pictorial material. 2. Each channel is limited to the amount of processing that can take place at one time. And 3. Learners actively attempt to build pictorial and verbal models from the presented material and build connections between them. According to the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, adding redundant on-screen text to a multimedia presentation could overload the visual channel, creating what is called extraneous cognitive load. The cognitive theory of multimedia learning predicts that learners will learn more deeply from multimedia presentations in which redundant on-screen text is excluded rather than included. After some studies were done based off of students being given redundant text and audio, or non-redundant information with either one text or one audio, the results showed that in all of those cases, less is more. Like stated previously, having on-screen text is the best when there are no pictures in a presentation. The learner has ample time to process the pictures and words, such as when pacing is under learning control with forward and back buttons. A few words are presented next to the corresponding part of a picture, or when the learner is likely to have difficulty processing spoken words. Studies show that students perform better on learning tests from lessons containing both printed and spoken words than from spoken words alone when there are no graphics. Another study showed that adding shortened printed text to an online narrated slideshow resulted in better transfer test performance. Some even think that the use of the redundancy principle would be good for people who speak non-native languages. However, tests were studied and the results were that they were non-conclusive and that the redundancy principle does not help non-native language speakers. With all this being said, there is still some information that needs to be studied with the redundancy principle, including the kind of learner, the materials, and the presentation methods given. Think about all the presentations that you've given in the past or any that you're going to be giving in the future. Do they fall under the redundancy principle? If so, see how you can try and change it.